Good morning, dear friends. Let us do today's Daily Mitzvah, day 42, for Tuesday. And today we continue the same mitzvah as yesterday, which gives us a little bit more of an opportunity to explore that mitzvah. So we are continuing the laws of Shabbos, and we have the same mitzvah as yesterday, that it is forbidden for a Jewish court to hold court proceedings on Shabbos. And there's a lot of technical details that come up in the daily mitzvah for today, the way that Rambam teaches us this mitzvah, and how we get to the mitzvah, because this is one of those mitzvahs that if you look in the 5 books of Moses, if you look in the Torah and you look at the verse, the pasuk in the Torah, is actually quite it's quite a stretch. How do you get from this verse to this prohibition? So the Rambam walks us through that, and there are some technical details. So hopefully we could dig in a little bit more into those details, since we already did the mitzvah yesterday. So here's the mitzvah. There's a verse in the Torah that says, and you shall not kindle a fire in all of your dwellings. Okay, that sounds simple enough. On Shabbos, no lighting fires. Comes the Talmud, comes the sages and say, something's wrong, something's off. What's happening here? Fire is one of the 39 general categories of forbidden work on Shabbos. So there's a lot of things you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. One of them is fire. And here's the thing. The Torah does not explicitly mention what these 39 categories of forbidden work on Shabbos are. The Torah only says a general statement, and you shall not do any work on Shabbos. It's part of the 10 Commandments. The Torah, other than that, says nothing about what is forbidden work, what are the details, what are the parameters, nothing. All the details and all the specifics of what are the types of forbidden labor and all the variables and details, all that comes from the oral tradition, from the oral Torah, which is not written down in Scripture, that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was the one who gave us all these laws. So the sages in Talmud ask, what is going on over here that the Torah singles out fire, and it's the only specific forbidden act that it tells you, okay, don't do this. Why is it singling out fire? And if it's going to start singling out the different forms of forbidden work, single out everything. And if you're not going to single out everything, then why are you mentioning only fire? And through a very lengthy discussion and an investigation, the Talmud comes to a fascinating conclusion that this verse is not what it sounds like. You read the verse and it just sounds like, okay, don't light a fire on Shabbos. But the sages say it can't mean that. It's impossible that it means that. It must be speaking about a different fire, and because speaking about a different fire, that you would maybe think this is a kind of fire that you are allowed to light on Shabbos, therefore it's coming and telling you, no, this fire you're not allowed to light on Shabbos. And the logic is like this. Torah tells you, and we know that it's forbidden to light a fire on Shabbos. That's already included. The general prohibition is already included in the general verse, don't do any work, from the 10 Commandments. But then there's one type of fire for Shabbos that is a mitzvah fire, which means it's not just you lighting a fire because you want to light a fire to make a bonfire or to cook something, but this is already the fire that the Torah tells you to light, which is the form of punishment called death by fire. And as I mentioned yesterday, I want you to take a good listen to that if you didn't listen to it. The death by fire does not mean that the person was thrown onto an altar, a human sacrifice. It is actually very different. It's basically death by heat being applied from the inside of the body, not from the outside. We don't have to get into all the gory details. And also the idea, we spoke about this yesterday, that it was virtually impossible, almost impossible, for the death penalty for somebody to actually ever make the bar to be put to death by a Jewish court. Today in America we hear about death penalty, and it happens. The states that allow it, it happens somewhat often. A few deaths a year, a few people are being put to death by the judicial system of America. A few people a year per state. The Talmud tells us that, first of all, there's only one court in Israel that was allowed to do it. Only the Supreme Court was allowed to put somebody to death in Israel. It wasn't like any rabbi could decide you have to be put to death, God forbid. It wasn't like any small court was allowed to decide that. It had to be the Supreme Court. It had to be the Supreme Court of 71 justices, and the bar of evidence and the bar of investigation had to be so high that made it virtually impossible to ever actually give somebody the death penalty. The Talmud says that if the Supreme Court would put somebody to death more than once every 70 years, it was considered a bloody court, a murderous court. I'm saying just consider that. Even once every 70 years was considered already pretty rare and almost impossible to get to. So it's important to keep that in mind. You hear death penalty, you hear death by fire, you could think it's much more extreme, but in any case, I digress. So let's get back on to the plot. Back to the plot. The Talmud says that this verse, "Don't light a fire," is specifically talking about the death penalty, because the death penalty is a mitzvah in the Torah. It's one of the 613 commandments that under certain extreme situations, a Jew has to be put to death. Here's how to do it. And there's 4 different methods that the Torah tells us how to put someone to death. And that's a mitzvah. So you may think, 1 second, don't light a fire. That's talking about a pedestrian fire, an arbitrary fire. You just want to burn a fire for your own personal needs. But what if it's a mitzvah maybe that you are allowed to do? Because a mitzvah to not light a fire, but a mitzvah fire maybe that you are allowed to do. Oh, so the Talmud says that's why we need this extra verse. The verse is telling us, you shall not light a fire in all of your dwelling places. This is referring to the fire of the mitzvah fire, of putting something to death. And specifically telling you, don't put something to death by fire on Shabbos, even though it's a mitzvah. Wait till after Shabbos if a court needs to put something to death. And from there, the Talmud continues to extrapolate that this is referring to all forms of death penalty, that none of them are allowed to be done on Shabbos. And from there, the Talmud gives another argument that the Torah adds the words b'chol meish v'seichem, and you shall not light a fire in all of your dwelling places. Okay, well, that's interesting. Why would the Torah have to tell us, don't light a fire in all your dwelling places? B'chol meish v'seichem in all your dwelling places, that's really unnecessary. The Torah should say, on Shabbos, don't light a fire. And the Talmud does a brilliant thing. Later, in the book of Numbers, in Bamidbar, where the Torah gives us the laws of the Jewish judicial system, the laws of justice, it gives us the same exact words, B'chol meish v'seichem. These are the laws of justice that you shall have in all of your dwelling places, B'chol meish v'seichem. The Talmud says, look, these words, B'chol meish v'seichem, are the words that the Torah uses always in the context of the judicial system. And from there, the Talmud learns out that this verse, which begins telling you only about fire, putting something to death by fire, is really speaking about all of Jewish judicial system court proceedings. None of it should be happening on Shabbos. And we learned that from the extra words of the Torah, B'chol meish v'seichem, which is the hint that the Torah is telling us that it refers to all courts throughout the land, no matter what is the nature of the court proceedings, not only death penalty. And dear friends, that is our daily mitzvah. Quite a lengthy note today, and a little bit technical. Hope you got this far, and hope you're enjoying. And we'll see you soon for our next daily mitzvah. Take care.